go. All right. And then back up. And then I can look into the camera and we can be like, cut.
Happy holidays and Merry Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas from Mindframes and Screen Anarchy.
Yep, and today's edition we're going to be celebrating B-movie Christmas.
That's right.
We have some B-movies.
Shout Factory and Scream Factory sent us a whole bunch of what I call B-movies. And what I mean by B-movies are these are all science fiction, fantasy, and horror movies and thrillers that are interesting mainly because they are, from a certain time period. They evoke a certain kind of mood. They're a lot of fun to just sort of watch casually, or maybe theme a party around or this kind of thing.
A few of these might literally be B movies.
Yeah,
second feature.
Oh, yeah, no. Some of these are very definitely B movies. And I'm just going to recommend a few of them. Shout Factory was kind enough to send us 11 of their catalog titles.
You know, I'm not a big B movie person, Dave, but you tell me why these are so good.
The thing about B movies is they have monsters. They have screams and close-up. They have cobwebs. They have robots. They have great big genre conventions and elements. They often have very over-the-top performances. Sometimes their photography is extremely evocative of an era. And so particularly, like I'm 53, if you grew up watching, movies on television like I did, you're going to see how far these movies take you back to how, what it was like, to catch movies late at night on TV or whatever else. This is, in the main, I'm really excited about the stuff they've sent me. Some of them are just so bad they're good, and some of them are lost classics.
All right, let's go through them.
All right. Well, this first one is called The Screaming Skull. There aren't any extras on here at all, except... Oh, look at that. That's nice. There you go, Dave. Except for the Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode that this was based on. This is a weird, clunky movie. Think Carnival of Souls if it was a lot less artful. Not in terms of plot, but just in terms of what it's trying to achieve. I think let's see. This thing is 68 minutes long. So it was definitely the bottom end of a double feature at some point. Screaming Skull, really big 50s horror film. There's another 50s horror film called The Four Skulls of Jonathan Drake. And if you grew up with a book called Dennis Gifford's Pictorial History of the Horror Film, then you grew up with a particular image of a guy holding up a shrunken head that's probably the archetypal image of a guy holding a shrunken head. And that's really why you'd be watching this.
I really like his cell phone song, too.
Which one?
You call your cell phone. That's Jonathan Drake, right?
No, this is an entirely different Drake. Oh, God. Yeah, there's no extras on this.
I'm pretty sure that's the same guy. This
is called The House That Dripped Blood. This is one of the great anthology films from the 1970s. It's British, and it does have an audio commentary from author Troy Holworth. That's one of the big reasons that you would want it. Has that wonderful...
It has vampires, voodoo, vixens, victims.
Yeah.
Lots of V words.
Lots of V. And better than the V that you could be out there getting. So, V... D.
You're on your own now.
I really blew that one. So I really recommend you stay inside and watch a movie. This is The House That Dripped Blood, and it's a lot of fun. You really would not be sorry if you...
I think I've actually maybe heard of this one and seen it.
Okay, this is from 1990. This movie stars Thomas Dolby as a bad guy. She blinded me with science. That Thomas Dolby. This movie stars Toni Basil as a hundreds-of-year-old vampire mom. Toni Basil, hey, Mickey, you're so pretty, don't you understand? Hey, Mickey.
I mainly know her from this movie.
Yeah, well, that's, where a lot of people would know her. But this movie isn't Dracula. This is Rockula. And I'm just going to read here. Ralph is just your typical average vampire with love in his heart, music in his veins, and a curse in his head. Every 22 years, he's doomed to lose his soulmate Mona at the hands of a rhinestone, peg-legged pirate brandishing Hambone. But this time around, with the help of his newly formed band Rockula, Ralph is determined to crush the curse once and for all and show that Mona is... that when you're a vampire, true love is eternal and rock and roll never dies. Basically, this is what Twilight could have been instead of being what it is. So, yeah, I made fun of Twilight. Deal with it. Whatever. And this is got a ton of extras on it. Really recommend it. It's hysterically funny. You could theme a whole party around it. This is a Spanish horror film. It is called The House That Screamed. And it was made, I believe, in 1970, so it's a very influential film that takes place in a girls' school. There's an erotic element to it, but really it's just a really creepy, dread-laced horror film of the period, and just looks gorgeous. So really important film that it's nice to see finally get a list. You get both versions of this movie here. You get the U.S. theatrical release and the extended version. And you get an interview, a couple of interviews on it. So that's really cool. This stars Bill Pullman and Bill Paxton. So enough said. Game over, man, is all I have to say about that. This is called Brain Dead. And if you can imagine how a movie could star Bill Paxton and Bill Pullman and have that cover, you're a better man than me. I didn't even know about this movie until I got this in the mail.
I didn't know if Bill Paxton knows about this movie.
Well,
you might not remember it.
Unless he went to movie hell for
for
starring in it, and I doubt that he did because he was the prince of a guy. Miss you, Bill. You were great. But this is basically...
It's too bad he couldn't take this movie with him.
Oh my God! You haven't even seen this, you bad toad. This is one of those movies that you gather around with your friends to watch. It's completely over the top. Came out in 1990. Takes place in a brain research laboratory. And everybody is, trying to steal everybody else's brain. It's great. You need to see it. Really, really fun. Has the commentary from the director on it. This is actually a classic apocalyptic thriller. This is Colossus the Forbin Project. This is basically about a computer that is put in charge of the world's defense, military defense, and it threatens to take over.
This sounds familiar. Is there a liquidy guy too?
No, there's not a liquidy guy. Not a liquidy guy in this.
Arnold. No.
This stars Eric Braeden, and Eric Braeden's claim to fame was he was like on a soap opera here in the States for years and years and years and years. But
his claim to not fame.
I don't know if it was As the World Turns or General Hospital. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but he was in one of those. And this has a commentary with an author in it. It has an interview with Eric Braeden, and it's a great movie. I watched it recently, and I was really glad I have it. If you like apocalyptic movies, this came out in 1970, and it really has that apocalyptic pre the day after kind of feel. So
I don't know what to say about this one.
Well,
I think I've heard of this.
Yeah,
it looks like it's made from the 60s, but it feels like a 50s movie.
Well, it was made in 1966. It's called The Projected Man, and it's a pretty famous film. The best way to describe this movie is it looks and feels like a sort of desperate science fiction film. The kind of science fiction film in the 70s where they pulled out all the stops and with the cheap sets and the scenario to try to entice viewers. Basically, he is a scientist that gets a projection device. He gets submitted to a device that's kind of like the device in The Fly, where he can be transmitted over a large distance, and winds up becoming a monster in the result. when he touches people, they die. So, The Projected Man. Kind of reminiscent of the 4D Man, actually. If you've never seen that, that's another great film. That needs a Blu-ray release. 4D Man. And these 3 films...
You got to talk about that last one. Come on. This plot, oh, man.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This is from the screenwriter of Psycho and many
From someone with somewhat of a connection to Psycho.
Yes. No. He wrote the screenplay
All right.
to Psycho, Joe Stefano, and he was very involved in The Outer Limits. Mm-hmm. But this is Eye of the Cat, and this is a late 60s movie of a particular type that just looks and feels utterly of its era. Wiley and Cassia are looking for a way to get their hands on the hefty inheritance of Wiley's cat-loving, wealthy Aunt Danny. But there's one little problem. Wiley suffers from a severe case of allurophobia, the fear of cats. And in order for their plot to succeed, they must first eliminate Aunt Danny's legions of feline companions, which proves much more difficult than expected. So this is Mouse Hunt with a little bit more of a plot. And probably far less overall entertaining, but I'm going to watch it because I love this kind of stuff.
I'm surprised they didn't call it The Cats.
Well, let's face it. There's that musical Cats.
Oh, yeah, that's
it's probably
true.
Based on this, right? Okay.
Maybe.
So I'm sure T.S. Eliot had nothing to do with the musical Cats. So
he was dead by the time he was made.
Yeah, this movie is made in 1967, also very much of its era. It's called Games. Stars Simone Signoret, who you can see leering there. At the young damsel in peril. And it says James Caan, whom you'll remember from The Godfather and Misery, and Catherine Ross, who was in Graduate and The Legacy. And Simone Signoret, who was Room at the Top and Diabolique. So this has really got a wild cast. Great cast, starring the psychological thriller Paul and Jennifer are a pair of wealthy Upper East Side socialites who like to amuse themselves by playing twisted and occasionally sadistic mind games. But when a mysterious woman shows up at their door and begins to exhibit uncanny psychic abilities, the rules change and the stakes become higher and deadlier than ever before. So this is probably a really bad movie that is really fun to watch. And I can't wait to just plug it in and kind of zone out. These movies remind me a lot of really great films like Wait Until Dark. And, because they do manage, some genre tension. And often they have really interesting performances and really interesting casts, and they look really great. The last film is really close to my heart. And Mike, if you're a genre movie fan like me, there are movies that you want to introduce people to. And you want to make them sit down and you want to make them watch because you will convince their lives will be better if they know about these movies.
Sounds like conversion, but go ahead.
It does sound like conversion.
Is Xenu involved?
No, Xenu is not involved. But William Castle is involved. William Castle was a filmmaker who was the king of the gimmick. So if you think of skeletons floating along on guy wires, or sheets shocking people in theaters, or death insurance, or people deciding the ends of movies, the audiences doing that in theaters, that's where William Castle comes in. And he did The House on Haunted Hill and The Tingler, and so many other movies that are just so worth your time to watch. And this is one of the last William Castle movies I haven't seen. And it follows these other, 60s films. This is made in 1964, that have kind of a murder subplot, and the murderers getting their comeuppance.
That a vengeance film?
Yeah, and this is called The Night Walker. And you can see it's got that amazing cover art that I think is based on a Goya painting. Not 100% sure, but I think that's based on a Goya painting called The Nightmare. I probably have that wrong. Look it up. Or if it might be Fuseli. Anyway, this also has a Psycho connection in that the screenplay is by the writer of the novel Psycho.
Oh,
and,
wow.
Robert Bloch was very involved in film and helped produce a lot of films. Following the death of her millionaire husband, Howard Irene Trent endures dreams so real and terrifying that she finds herself trapped in an eerie world existing between fact and fantasy. Isolated from the world, Irene feels there is no one she could turn to except for her husband's personal attorney, the only visitor Howard ever allowed into the house. But as her dreams take vivid shape, Irene begins to walk into a very real nightmare of deception, murder, and betrayal. So a lot of really, really guys. Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor in it. So looks like it's a really, really fun kind of psychological thriller from the 1960s. So I hope you've enjoyed B-Movie Christmas. I hope you think about getting one of these for a stocking stuffer for someone on your list who just likes old movies, particularly old science fiction, fantasy, horror, or thrillers. Thanks, Shout Factory, for sending them out. And we'll talk to you later. Bye. Okay.
Yeah.